Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are going to tackle a topic that often sparks heated debate: the economic impact of refugees on those host countries. You've given us a ton of research, including excerpts from a master's thesis. It's going to be fascinating to unpack what really happens when countries open their doors to refugees.
I think you'll find some of the findings quite surprising. There are a lot of misconceptions surrounding this topic.
For sure. And to make sure we're all on the same page, let's start by defining some key terms. We're talking about both migrants and refugees today. What's the distinction according to the UN and the IOM?
Well, a migrant is a broad term for anyone who moves away from the usual home for at least 3 months, whether within a country or across borders. A refugee, on the other hand, is specifically someone who has crossed an international border due to a well-founded fear of persecution.
Oh, okay.
This persecution could be based on their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group.
Okay, so a refugee is essentially seeking asylum because they can't safely stay in their own country. But what about people fleeing poverty or natural disasters? Where do they fit in?
That's where things get a bit more complex. While those situations can be incredibly difficult, they don't technically fall under the official definition of a refugee.
Okay.
People fleeing poverty or natural disasters might be considered migrants, but there's often debate about how to categorize them, especially in developing countries where data collection can be challenging.
Right.
For this deep dive, though, we'll be focusing on the official definitions of migrant and refugee.
Good point. It's always important to be clear about the terms we're using. So let's zoom out now and look at the global landscape of refugees. What kind of numbers are we talking about?
The numbers are quite significant. In 2019, there were 272 million international migrants worldwide. And when we look specifically at refugees, a staggering 85% of them reside in low and middle-income countries.
That's a huge responsibility for those countries to shoulder. Which countries are hosting the most refugees currently?
The top 3 are Turkey, Pakistan, and Uganda. And to add to the complexity, over 2/3 of refugees worldwide come from just 5 countries: Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Myanmar, and Somalia.
Wow.
This concentration highlights the impact of ongoing conflicts and crises in displacing populations.
It really puts the human cost of these conflicts into perspective. Now let's shift our focus to Europe, which has been a major destination for asylum seekers in recent years. What's driving that influx?
There are multiple factors at play, including the Syrian conflict, economic disparities between countries, and political instability in various regions.
Right.
These factors have led to unprecedented numbers of asylum seekers arriving in the EU.
Within the EU, are there particular countries that receive the majority of asylum applications?
Yes, Germany, France, and Spain are the top receiving countries. For instance, in 2019, Germany alone received over 142,000 applications, representing over 23% of all first-time applicants in the EU.
Given that influx, I'm curious about the demographics of these asylum seekers. What can you tell us about their age and education levels?
Interestingly, the median age of asylum seekers in many European countries is actually lower than that of the native population. This has significant implications for demographics and the potential impact on the workforce. However, we can't make sweeping generalizations because educational attainment varies widely among asylum seekers. While some arrive with high levels of education, a significant percentage have lower levels compared to other migrants and native-born populations.
It sounds like there's a lot of diversity within this population. Now, the big question looming in everyone's mind is the economic impact. Is it a drain on resources? Or can refugees actually benefit their host countries?
That's the question we're here to unpack, right? And I think you'll find that the answer is more nuanced than simply positive or negative.
Okay, so let's get into it. What does the research actually say about the economic impact of refugees?
Well, first we need to address the elephant in the room, the prevailing perception that refugees are a burden on their host countries. Research shows that while there can be costs involved, especially in the short term, refugee inflows often lead to a small but mainly positive impact on the economy, particularly over the long term.
That's interesting, but I'm sure many people would wonder how that's possible, given the costs of providing housing, healthcare, and other services.
You're right. There are definitely upfront costs associated with supporting refugees. However, it's essential to consider the economic impact over different time frames. Those initial costs are often outweighed by the long-term benefits that refugees bring.
I'm intrigued. Can you elaborate on those long-term benefits? What makes the difference?
One of the key benefits is a more diverse and resilient labor market. Refugees bring new skills, perspectives, and even entrepreneurial drive. They can fill gaps in the workforce. especially in sectors experiencing labor shortages.
So it's not just about refugees filling existing jobs. They might actually be creating new opportunities.
Exactly. They can also contribute to a more dynamic and innovative economy. For example, a study by the Tent Foundation found that refugee-founded businesses in Europe created an average of 10 jobs each within 5 years of operation. They were also more likely to export goods and services, demonstrating their contribution to economic growth.
That's impressive. It sounds like they're not just participating in the economy, they're actively driving growth. Now, we often hear concerns about refugees taking jobs away from native workers. What does the research say about that?
It's a common concern, but studies have shown that the impact on the job market is far more complex than a simple substitution effect. The impact depends on factors like skill complementarity, the overall health of the economy, and crucially, the integration policies in place.
So instead of viewing it as competition, we should be thinking about how refugees can complement the existing workforce.
Precisely. Take the example of Koblenz, Germany, where a program was implemented to connect refugees with local businesses in need of skilled workers. The program focused on matching refugees' existing skills with in-demand jobs, resulting in successful integration for both refugees and businesses.
Those are some really compelling examples. It's starting to paint a different picture of the economic impact of refugees. But I'm sure many listeners are still wondering how these positive effects are achieved. What role do integration policies play in all of this?
Integration policies are absolutely crucial. They can determine whether refugees become a burden or a boon to the economy. Effective policies go beyond simply granting asylum. They focus on empowering refugees to become self-sufficient and contributing members of society.
So what are some examples of these effective policies?
Well, there are two key approaches: active refugee admission policies and targeted development assistance. Active admission policies go beyond simply letting refugees in. They involve creating pathways for them to arrive safely and legally, and providing support for their integration from the outset. Targeted development assistance involves investing in programs that equip refugees with the skills and connections they need to thrive economically, like language training, vocational programs, and job placement services.
It sounds like the focus is on providing refugees with the tools to build a new life for themselves, not just providing handouts.
Exactly. And there are some inspiring examples of countries implementing these policies effectively. Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Uganda have adopted what are called refugee self-reliance policies,
Yeah.
which allow refugees to work, farm, and even start businesses, often within designated economic zones.
That's a world away from the image of refugees being confined to camps and relying solely on aid. Can you give us a specific example of how these self-reliance policies are working in practice?
Absolutely. Take the case of Kabondo, Tanzania. When a wave of refugees arrived there, the town was quite underdeveloped. But within a few years, driven by both refugee entrepreneurial spirit and support from local NGOs, the town experienced a surge in economic activity. Bus services increased dramatically, bringing in a wider range of goods. New businesses popped up, providing everything from mobile phone services to construction materials. It's a powerful illustration of how refugees, when given the opportunity and the right support, can contribute to the economic well-being of their new communities.
That's a fantastic example of how the arrival of refugees can be a catalyst for growth, not just for themselves, but for the entire community. I'm starting to see how this narrative challenges the more common negative perception of refugees.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We haven't even delved into the remarkable entrepreneurial spirit often found within refugee communities.
Refugees as entrepreneurs. Tell me more. That's not something you hear every day.
It's a fascinating phenomenon, and one that deserves more attention. Studies have consistently shown high rates of entrepreneurship among refugees in various countries. They often display remarkable resilience, adaptability, and a knack for spotting opportunities.
What factors contribute to this entrepreneurial spirit? It seems counterintuitive given the challenges they've faced.
It might seem surprising, but their experiences often play a significant role. Refugees are accustomed to taking risks and navigating unfamiliar situations. They've often had to leave behind established careers and support systems, forcing them to think creatively and build new lives from scratch.
Right.
This can foster a can-do attitude and a willingness to seize opportunities that others might overlook.
So they're not just bringing skills and experience, they're bringing a unique mindset.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of community networks. Refugees often rely on each other for support, forming strong bonds that can translate into valuable business partnerships and collaborative ventures.
It's like they're building a new ecosystem of support and innovation within their host country. That's fascinating. But going back to those integration policies, how do they impact a refugee's ability to succeed as an entrepreneur?
Supportive policies can be a game changer. Remember the two-pronged approach we discussed earlier, active refugee admission policies and targeted development assistance. Both are crucial for fostering entrepreneurship.
Right, those policies can help refugees establish themselves and access resources.
Hmm.
But how do they specifically support entrepreneurial ventures?
Well, active admission policies that prioritize family reunification can provide a crucial support system for aspiring entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Targeted development assistance can include microloan programs specifically designed for refugees, mentorship opportunities connecting them with experienced business owners, and training programs tailored to their unique needs.
It sounds like these policies are about creating a level playing field, giving refugees the chance to leverage their skills and contribute to the economy in meaningful ways.
That's the goal. And it's not just about individual success stories, it's about recognizing the collective economic potential of refugee communities. Studies have shown that refugee entrepreneurs create jobs not only for themselves, but also for others, boosting local economies and contributing to overall prosperity.
It's a win-win situation. Now, we've talked a lot about positive examples, but it's important to acknowledge that there can be downsides to refugee integration, especially if it's not handled well. What are some of the potential challenges?
You're right, it's not always a smooth journey. One potential challenge is the impact on the labor market, specifically the concern that an influx of refugees might lead to lower wages for certain groups of native workers.
That's a concern often raised by critics of open immigration policies. What does the research say about the scale of this impact? And are there ways to mitigate it?
The research on this topic is mixed, and the impact varies greatly depending on the specific context. Some studies have found a small negative impact on wages for low-skilled native workers in certain sectors, particularly in the short term. However, other studies have found no significant impact or even a positive impact as refugees can stimulate demand and create new jobs.
So it's not a simple cause and effect relationship. There are a lot of variables at play.
Exactly. The key is to implement policies that facilitate integration and address potential labor market imbalances. For example, investing in education and training programs for both refugees and native workers can help ensure that everyone has the skills they need to compete in a changing economy.
So rather than viewing it as a zero-sum game, it's about creating opportunities for everyone to benefit.
Precisely. And we need to remember that the impact of refugees on wages is just one piece of the puzzle. There are also broader economic considerations such as the impact on tax revenues, social security systems, and overall economic growth.
Speaking of broader economic considerations, we can't forget about the EU's role in all of this. The EU has been grappling with a significant influx of refugees in recent years. How is it approaching the economic implications of this situation?
The EU has adopted a four-pillar agenda for managing migration. These pillars include reducing incentives for irregular migration, securing external borders, strengthening the common asylum policy, and developing a new policy on legal migration.
That sounds comprehensive, but what do those pillars actually look like in practice? And are they effective?
Well, reducing incentives for irregular migration involves addressing the root causes of displacement, such as conflict and poverty, as well as collaborating with countries of origin to improve economic opportunities and living conditions.
So it's about tackling the push factors that drive people to migrate in the first place.
Exactly. Securing external borders involves strengthening border control measures to prevent illegal entry and human trafficking. However, this pillar has been criticized by human rights groups for potentially violating the rights of asylum seekers and for creating a Fortress Europe mentality.
It sounds like there's a tension between security concerns and humanitarian obligations.
There is, and it's a difficult balance to strike. The third pillar, strengthening the common asylum policy, focuses on ensuring fair and efficient asylum procedures across all EU member states. This includes establishing common standards for processing asylum applications and providing adequate reception conditions for asylum seekers.
So it's about creating a more harmonized system across the EU.
Yes, the goal is to prevent discrepancies in treatment and to ensure that asylum seekers have access to their rights, regardless of where they arrive in the EU. The final pillar, developing a new policy on legal migration, aims to attract skilled workers and entrepreneurs from outside the EU, filling labor market gaps and contributing to economic growth.
So it's a multifaceted approach, tackling both the challenges and the opportunities presented by migration.
Precisely. However, it's important to note that the effectiveness of these policies is still being debated, and there are ongoing challenges in implementation.
What are some of the key challenges the EU is facing in implementing these policies?
One major challenge is the lack of solidarity among member states. Different countries have different capacities and political will to receive and integrate refugees. This has led to uneven distribution of responsibility and strain on countries at the front lines of the refugee crisis.
So it's not just about having policies on paper, it's about ensuring that they're implemented effectively and fairly across the bloc.
Exactly. Another challenge is the rise of anti-immigrant sentiment in some parts of Europe. This has made it difficult to implement policies that are perceived as being too lenient towards migrants and refugees.
So the political climate can play a significant role in shaping the direction of these policies.
Absolutely. And then there were the practical challenges of integrating large numbers of people with diverse backgrounds and needs into existing social systems and labor markets. This requires significant investment in language training, education, housing, and healthcare.
It sounds like a complex and multifaceted challenge. So where does the EU go from here?
That's the million-dollar question. Finding a sustainable and humane approach to migration will require continued dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to address the root causes of displacement.
It's a global challenge that demands a global response. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the issue of qualifications not being recognized in new countries. I imagine that can be a huge barrier for refugees trying to enter the workforce, even those with advanced degrees and professional experience.
It's a significant obstacle, and one that has both economic and human costs. Imagine being a doctor or an engineer forced to take low-skilled jobs simply because your qualifications aren't recognized in your new country.
It's heartbreaking and it's a waste of valuable skills and potential. What's being done to address this challenge?
Thankfully, there's growing awareness of this issue, and some countries are taking steps to address it. For example, Germany has introduced a fast-track recognition procedure for refugee professionals, making it easier for them to have their qualifications assessed and recognized.
So it's about creating pathways for refugees to put their skills to use and contribute to their new societies.
Precisely. And it's not just about individual benefits, it's about maximizing the economic potential of refugee populations as a whole.
It's a smart investment not only in the life of refugees, but in the future of our economies. Now, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive, from defining key terms to exploring the complex interplay of integration policies, labor market dynamics, and the entrepreneurial spirit of refugees.
It's been a fascinating exploration so far.
I agree, but there's one crucial piece of the puzzle we haven't discussed yet: the impact of cultural exchange. How does that factor into the economic equation?
That's an excellent question, one that deserves its own deep dive. We'll explore that in the next part of our conversation.
You know, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about how refugees impact those host countries, but I'm kind of curious about the flip side. How does the economic climate of the host country affect refugees' experiences and opportunities?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And it's often overlooked. A host country's economic conditions, things like the unemployment rate, wage levels, access to affordable housing, all play a significant role in shaping the integration process for refugees.
Right, it makes sense. Right. A thriving economy with tons of job opportunities and those social support systems is likely to make it easier for refugees to kind of get on their feet, while a struggling economy with high unemployment and limited resources might present some pretty big challenges.
Exactly. Think about it this way. If a host country is dealing with high unemployment, even those native-born citizens might be having a tough time finding work. Now add a large influx of refugees to that situation. It can make those existing tensions worse and create a perception of competition for those scarce resources.
So addressing those broader economic challenges is key, not just for the well-being of refugees, but for creating a society that's more inclusive and stable for everyone.
Absolutely. It's about fostering economic justice. It's about making sure that the benefits of economic growth are shared fairly among all members of society, including refugees.
That's a really important point. It's not just about creating policies specifically for refugees, it's about creating a society that really values inclusivity and recognizes those contributions of all its members.
Precisely. And it kind of highlights that connection between economic and social well-being.
Mm.
When we talk about the economic impact of refugees,
Yeah.
we got to consider both the micro and macro levels. At the micro level, we're talking about the impact on individual refugees and families, their ability to get jobs,
Yeah.
start businesses, build new lives.
Right, they're individual stories of resilience and contribution.
Exactly. But then at that macro level, we're looking at the broader impact on the overall economy. Things like GDP growth, innovation, and the long-term sustainability of social systems. It's this complex interaction of individual stories and those broader economic trends.
It kind of shows the need for a holistic approach to integration, one that really considers both the individual and those societal levels.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We can't just focus on one or the other. Successful integration requires a approach with lots of different parts. addressing both those immediate needs of refugees and the long-term health of the host society.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, exploring the economic benefits of refugee entrepreneurship, the ups and downs of those labor market dynamics, the crucial role of integration policies, and even those potential challenges and opportunities of cultural exchange.
It's been a really enriching conversation, and I hope our listeners have come away with a better understanding of this topic that's often misunderstood.
I agree. As we wrap up, what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember? What should they be thinking about as they continue to learn about this issue?
I think the main thing is to move beyond those simplistic narratives, the fear-mongering, the oversimplification of something that's actually very complex. Refugees aren't all the same. They bring a whole range of skills, experiences, and hopes for the future. And their impact on their host countries isn't set in stone. It's shaped by policies, by social attitudes, by economic conditions, and by the choices we make as individuals and as a society.
That's a good reminder that we have the power to shape the narrative and create a world that's more inclusive and equitable.
Exactly. And that's where the real work begins. Not just understanding this complex issue, but engaging with it in a thoughtful, compassionate, and constructive way.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of exploration. We hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to keep learning about this fascinating and ever-evolving topic.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deeper.